after you finish laying a track in an area, whether on your whole layout or just a module, it is time to start the wiring process. The first step of the wiring process is to figure out where to put track feeders. There are two basic principles for placing feeders. The first principle, and I call this the 10-foot rule, is that you need to have a set of feeders every 10 feet. So the maximum distance to any one feeder is 5 feet. I have an example here, and here's a simple oval. This is assuming, say, this is HO scale on a 4x8 piece of plywood. You got 22-inch radius curves. This means you're probably going to have this oval is going to be about 14 feet of track going around this oval. Now, if we just put one feeder at the beginning, at the one spot where your power pack sits, it's going to be approximately 7 feet all the way around to the maximum distance to the furthest away from the set of feeders. Because you're greater than 5 feet, and considering the resistance in the rail, and you got rail joiners that are not soldered, you're going to potentially lose voltage. So it's likelihood that your backside of your track here, you'll notice your locomotive slow down. So what we need to do here is make sure, again, you don't exceed the 10-foot rule. Make sure feeders that you maximum 5 feet either way, maximum 5 feet. So we put a set of feeders here across. This cuts our maximum track distance instead of 7 feet all the way around. There's a feeder here and a feeder here, so you're really only going to be at about, say, 3.5 feet to your feeder. So at this point here is your maximum distance between this feeder or this feeder. Example, and same with this side. Then with 3 feet, then you can have more uniform power around your layout, so you're not going to have probably a noticeable voltage drop. So the same principle occurs here on a layout such as this, where it's maybe in this case this is a much larger oval, but this works with any type of track arrangements. So this rule mainly just means that if you have long stretches of track, you need to make sure you got feeders at least every 10 feet. Now if you have switches, in this case where we have these live frog turnouts, or potentially expansion gaps, module gaps such as this, you're likely to have feeders closer than the 10 feet. But potentially if you have long, say stretches of hidden track, or places where this may occur, you will need to make sure you add those feeders in, so we don't have inadvertent voltage drop across those feeders. The second basic principle is we want to have one feeder to each continuous piece of rail. And this is mainly because we don't want to rely on a mechanical joint, such as rail joiners, or through turnouts, through the points. Mainly because over time, these locations here can oxidize. You can get dirt in there. It will eventually cause these points to get dirty and potentially lose contact. If you're relying on these points to travel power, you're likely to get stops. Your engines will stall and things like that. This also really means that for joiners and where you're not crossing points, you should really try to solder. And if you're using a system flex track especially, you should be trying to solder joints where needed. To basically minimize, to keep these rail pieces as long as possible. Obviously, if you're doing like a sectional track system like Unitrack, you're not soldering rail joints together, but it would just mean that I would recommend that you add additional power joiners or terminal tracks, more than one spot on your layout. Now, a caveat with soldering joints is that, especially if your layout is in a non-climate controlled area, and especially in hot, warm climates like Southwest United States, Arizona, Nevada, potentially Florida, and where you got hot temperatures extremes, if all your joints are soldered, there's a possibility that the rails will expand and you'll get tracks, buckling and things. And that is always a possibility. So you make sure that every periodically you have some gaps cut in just for the purpose of track expansion. And this, of course, the caveat of this means that expansion gaps for heat will require you to have extra feeders in place. So now it's going to go through the layout here and show here some of the reasons. So where the feeders are currently sitting on these two modules. So first on this module here, there's a pair of feeders back here, and these will go all the way from the module joint to the module joint, or the next break on this piece of track. Same thing with these two. There's a pair of joints across these set, and this will go from this module joint around to the module joint that's sitting out over here. You also note that on this spur track back there is again we have a one feeder here, one feeder here, and then that kind of powers both these sides of the feeder. And why there's feeders on this section of track, there's always a possibility of a locomotive will likelihood need to drive onto this track. So that's why we have the feeders. Conversely, there's a short stub, a piece of track here for the serve this piggyback unloading ramp. I did not add a feeder in here because we're never going to have a locomotive on this piece of track beyond this joint. This is going to be a flat car. Your engine's always going to be pushing a car here, so you'll unlikely never have a locomotive sitting there. So there's no need to worry about powering this short section of track. So we basically want to do for this rail, for each continuous point, we want to be able to trace each rail and see, okay, is this continuous, and where to add feeders. So I'm going to get a little closer here so we can see. So for example, this inside rail, and this goes from, now remember that like a module joints like this are going to be considered to be a break. So this one feeder here serves from this module joint here all the way across to this insulated frog. This frog here has insulated rail joiners right here to prevent a short at the frog. So this one feeder is needed just to fill out this one piece of rail, relatively short. The outside rail, in this case, goes from this module joint through this section, through this turnout, and I'll turn this slightly, and then it will end at this frog here on this switch. Now this switch here is an insulated frog turnout. Now there is a jumper across this frog. However, again, we don't want to rely on the mechanical points here for power. So we want to make sure that we'll want to have a feeder here on this section. Now that feeder is actually on this piece of rail. If you note that this outside piece of rail starts at this turnout gap, across this section diagonal piece, then is one continuous piece of rail all the way through, then up this spur to the end. That is one continuous piece of rail from here all the way over here. So we only need one feeder for it. And we move on to like these particular rail here on this outside track. We have one feeder that's on this outside track, goes from the module joint at the end here, and it goes across and then ends at this frog. The outside rail with the feeder is here. That feeder covers the entire length of the module, from the module joint all the way through this turnout because it's continuous, and all the way to the module joint at the other end. And like what's kind of happened at the other end, this feeder serves the inside rail for this outer rail, covers the whole module from the module joint all the way down, but only to this frog point here. Now for these outer track, for the inner track, in this feeder that we have there, you note you have a constant piece of rail. This inner rail goes it's constant all the way to the module joint, all the way through, and then it comes down and then ends at this frog. So it's again one piece of rail. So a piece of rail is much longer than the switch or just one short piece of track like here. It can be really short. For instance, if I had a piece of track that was between feeders, these keys can be relatively short, but a lot of times it's actually, again, this is a couple feet long. And then lastly, we can get back on this back track. We have the two feeders here, but these two feeders I only consider them good up to this joint. And then the feeder that's sitting on this diagonal rail here, this is one continuous piece of rail that comes all the way through this switch up to that joint. Of course, while filming this, I did realize that on the inside rail, or the inside rail of this track, I am apparently missing a feeder. So we actually do need to add a feeder here, because again, while I have a feeder on this rail down here, we don't count it because it's across this mechanical joint. But I need a feeder that goes from this rail joint all the way across this rail to the end, to the other end. This feeder here covers the inside rail, but only up to this joint. So the easiest way for doing this is to put like these tape flags down and trace each continuous piece of rail, then mark a place where your feeder will go. This way, this is nice, has a nice visual look, so you can make sure you have all the feeders and note where to place. Because then when you get your drill out and start drilling holes for feeders and fishing wire, you can do that all. You can do that all at once, and it will save you a lot of time versus putting things down, picking it up, doing it step by step. You can drill all your holes all at once, and it will take a lot less time. So if you like this video, please give me a like, and considering subscribing if you like this content. Thank you for watching.